You're muted.
Very.
There you go. Now you're unmuted.
And he have an idea today.
All right.
I'll wait till we get going here.
Welcome to Idea Sync Inc., my imaginary corporation.
Register the domain.
Way back when we were doing Usenet Net News,
Yeah.
where we had the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
I used to have these imaginary corporations that I pretended to be working for because I didn't want to reveal the true corporation, MITRE. So one of them was Idea Sync Inc. SYNC, and what was some International Malefactor and Fulminator when I was ranting.
I used to have KPI, knowledge in the public interest.
Yeah, same idea. Make up these fake corporations to be the CEO of as your signature of your.
But do you know that there's actually an organization called Software for the Public Interest? Do you know what they do?
I never heard of them, so I could speculate, but I would have to stop to think first.
Do you know the Debian distribution of Linux?
Yeah, sure.
SPI was started to support Debian by Debbie and Ian. That's why Debian is the combined name. And they created Software for the Public Interest.
Oh, so Debian is two people's names joined together?
Debbie,
I didn't know that.
Debbie and Ian. It was a couple.
Oh, a man and wife couple?
Yep.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Like 20 years ago. My first encounter with Debian was 1997, November. I think it was Debian 1.3. It was the B-O release. They always name it after a character in what's that Disney movie, the Pixar movie? They had Woody and all the other animals.
Toy Story?
Toy Story. They always named the release after a Toy Story character.
I didn't know. Yeah, I basically began with Ubuntu, which is kind of similar, except
no,
Ubuntu, I think was a private corporation. Ubuntu was a private corporation, I think, not a nonprofit.
That's the name of the organization.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey Stacey, hey Sam.
Hello.
I finally, this weekend, feel like I've gotten through all my time zone changes from the international travel for the last 2-3 months.
Well, you woke up on time today.
Yeah. I didn't last week.
No, I didn't wake up at all last week.
In fact, yesterday even I missed a couple of early meetings.
Oh, did you? Wow.
Yeah. So, how you guys all doing?
Pretty good, all things considered.
What do you mean, all things considered?
It's a term of art from NPR.
Given that I'm still alive, life is still pretty good.
Basically on balance, because there's always ups and downs, and on balance, all things considered.
When you say all things considered, that means you have a big picture and then a small picture as well. So you check all the pictures.
Yeah, and there's the here and now in the immediate, and then there's stuff that's sort of floating around in the
That's right. Yeah.
Not too distant past, or worry about the not too distant future, and
Well, the other way to see it is. Sorry.
No, I knew what you meant. I just didn't know if there was something.
Oh.
I knew what the term meant. I just didn't know if there was something going on in your life.
Well, there are specific things always going on in one's life. They're rather banal most of the time. They're not earth-shattering, but yeah, there's things going on in my life that, me, I'm always vexed and perplexed about something that hasn't been resolved.
Well, I'll share a little bit about what I get to do later today. Later today, I'm getting together with about 3 or 4 other high school classmates. And this is after like 46 years. So, one of them I've kept in touch with every 5 or 10 years. We get lunch together. But, some of these guys I haven't seen since 46, 47 years ago. So we're just getting together at a local island little cafe here that's really nice for brunch. It overlooks the water. Gail's going to join us. This will be like 5 or 6 of us. And that'll be pretty fun. And
by the way,
is awesome.
Did you see the item that I tagged you on either last night or this morning?
I did, and I've seen it already. Actually,
did?
I didn't see it if it was this morning. I thought it was yesterday. You tagged me on
Yeah, yeah, you knew about it. Okay, I wasn't sure you'd heard it because there was hardly any press on it, like 2 items in Google
No,
News.
it's a nice little merger. Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about it for the rest of you guys. Doug Engelbart worked at Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research
He
Center.
did not. That's a mistaken belief. That is actually, yeah, a lot of people believe that, but that was not true. He worked at SRI.
Really?
Yes.
He did not have a relationship with the people at PARC at
His
all?
people left him and went to Xerox PARC in mass
Oh,
after they got frustrated. Okay.
well,
So
I
all
didn't.
the mouse stuff, the Star, the Alto, the Xerox, the bitmap displays, all of that did get done at the Xerox by Doug's team. Like 90% of it was Doug's team, but Doug stayed at SRI.
So when he did a demonstration, that famous demo video,
All of them were at SRI at the time.
that was done. I always thought that demo came out of Xerox PARC.
Nope.
Okay. Anyhow, the story yesterday or day before yesterday is that Xerox is donating PARC to SRI.
Palo Alto Research Center.
Yeah. It's sort of a mini Bell Labs, kind of, not really, but
I
it's a
really
research
wonder
center.
about the finances of that because over many decades they have lots of patents and they collect lots of royalties.
Yeah. So anyhow, so PARC is going to continue to exist, but it's now going to be owned by SRI and not by Xerox. They're just literally giving it away. They're not selling it or anything, and just transferring ownership to SRI. And SRI, for those of you who don't know, used to stand for Stanford Research Institute, and it was affiliated with Stanford. And then at some point around the Russell Targ and what's his name, Puthoff, they basically severed their formal connection to Stanford for a variety of reasons that, maybe Sam knows the reasons better than I do. But so they changed, they went by the initials SRI and essentially, I won't say disowned, but severed their formal ties to Stanford.
That's where the demo, by the way, of Windows in a bitmap display was seen by Steve Jobs, and he got his big aha. And that's where he then got the inspiration for the Lisa machine, which is super expensive, $10,000, not commercially successful, but that led to the Macintosh, which is now very successful.
Right. And that was at PARC or at SRI?
That was at PARC.
That was at
These
PARC.
people had already gone to PARC.
Okay.
He saw the demo and essentially stole the idea because he didn't license it, he just stole it.
I also was reading just a headline today that Steve Jobs was blown away by Smalltalk, which was also developed there.
Yeah,
by,
Adele Goldberg and Alan Kay did Smalltalk at Xerox PARC.
Yeah, and Smalltalk was I think the first or the most important object-oriented language. Instead of procedure-oriented languages like Fortran and all that stuff, this was called object-oriented, and it was a fundamentally different way to write software.
Yeah, there were a couple of attempts prior to that, but that was the most quote unquote successful and mature.
Yeah.
Actually, before Java, then Java took it over.
Yeah. I mean, there started off with things like Fortran, which is very procedure oriented. And then you had list processing, which was sort of a little weirdo in there. And then you had object oriented, which really took off big time in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Which I never supported. I never really truly got behind object oriented.
I did briefly in the late 80s. I played with Smalltalk. We got 2 versions of Smalltalk. Well, one version ran on the IBM 286 era machine. I mean, Borland put out a version of Smalltalk 5 that you could run on a 286 desktop, and I played with that in the late 80s.
It was nice in theory, but too much overhead, both from execution as well as from the language syntax itself.
Yeah. But it was good. It was good for very simple simulations where you had a system of component parts, and each component was sort of self-contained, but they communicated with each other. And so they would send messages, the components would send messages, which would influence the behavior of the others. But it wasn't like subroutine calls and returns. It was just, it was almost like actors in a play. In fact, they used the word actor as one of the metaphors. There was a species of small talk called actor. It was a powerful idea. You could do things in that architecture that was awkward to do in procedure-oriented languages.
For the record, I'm a functional programming guy. Have been for decades.
Well, that's because your father's a mathematician.
Well, also because it's nice and concise. It eliminates all that object-oriented, overhead crap.
Yeah. But I did like some of the fundamental concepts of object-oriented programming. It had affordances that were awkward or unavailable in procedure-oriented systems. For simulations, it was really a very nice platform for simulations.
Hello, Heiner.
Here's Heiner.
So Sam and Stacey have been relatively quiet because you and I have been hogging the
I know.
conversation, Barry. So I want to make sure that
It's all good.
you enter and Heiner gets to join. Heiner, how goes? Yeah,
I'm not sure if Heiner's got his sound
Fix
on.
that working.
I think he's still setting things up.
Heiner looks like a wild man today.
Well, he is hearing us. Okay. Now we know at least he's hearing us.
Yeah. Yeah. Stacey, how are you?
I'm good. The only connection I have to Stanford is the movie I just watched. The young girl wanted to go there. I just watched a movie. It was called A Good Person. It was such an emotional movie that I'm in a whole different space.
Huh.
It was really jarring in so many ways.
Is it a biopic or a?
No. It's a movie about addiction and family and mistakes and coming back from them, just everything. It's with Morgan Freeman. But it just really made me start thinking about the role of emotions in life, the role of faith, redemption, all those good things. So that's it.
I was reading the latest newsletter from Daniel Goleman. Goleman is the guy who is the big promoter of emotional intelligence education. And his newsletter, I think it was just yesterday, asserts that these AIs will never have emotions, which I dispute, but I wasn't going to sort of weigh into him, very dramatically on his newsletter, but I did post at least a couple of comments about it.
Well, on another thread, people were discussing conscious. Oh, sorry.
So
Go ahead,
before
Sam.
we leave that though, can you say a little bit more about the movie? Because that sounds intriguing.
I really can't, because what it did is first of all, I came in the middle. I had just woken up. So I mean, it's just what it provoked in me. But I want to just say on a totally different thread, which ties in, people were discussing consciousness, and they were discussing how far deep we want to even think about consciousness. And so for me, I think about consciousness and emotions and where those things connect. And it's still playing out. So I don't have anything to say yet because I'm still thinking about it. But I'm also thinking about how they show up physically in our body, the combination of emotions, and it's what's coming to me is almost thinking of emotions in terms of density or lightness and how that might flow energetically through one's body and how that might, I don't know. I just have a lot of thoughts on it that aren't, fully developed, but
I'm going to tag you on an item on that if I can find it.
7 out of 10 at IMDb.
Oh, it's well worth watching the movie. It was a beautiful movie. Beautiful movie.
So I presume Stanford's in there because of, I guess, a desire to go there or what?
Yeah, it was just a very small thing. I was just looking for some point of connection. Oh, I want to add one more thing to emotions, consciousness, and that would be the role of pets and animals. Because as you know, Marley's always in my consciousness now.
Right.
And I just think that that's, again, when I think about the new world that is coming, you know, like we're trying to birth, and I think about the role of animals and pets and what an important part they play in helping people to get in touch with their emotions and in helping and healing. I think that's a direction we really need to look at, the way we think about animals. And I think we need to be elevating them instead of being so, you know, human centric and thinking that, you know, for some reason, like, you know, we're just, you know, we're the great ones. And, you know, so that's it.
What I'm really looking forward to with the advent of these deep learning technologies is that once we have machine learning really ubiquitous, that it's in people's everyday experience, they're going to observe the dynamics of the learning process in non-humans. You see learning in animals, your pets learn, and people are familiar with that, but we've never really, most people except technical people have looked at learning in machines, non-living systems. And that's going to be really interesting because the theory that I've worked on for the last, 40 years says that anything that learns, be it organic or inorganic or carbon-based or silicon-based or alien life, anything that learns has affective states, which we experience as emotional states. And that's the vocabulary terms that we use. And some of them are mediated by molecules of emotion, and some are mediated just by signals in the nervous system. And so when we start looking at the dynamics of the learning process in machines, the question is, will people appreciate that the phenomenon that we call emotions is apparent in all learning systems? And why bother to create clinical terminology that's divorced from the vocabulary that we use in human learning?
I just want to jump in and say one thing. When I was in college, I was taught that, which I argued all the time, that animals don't learn.
They do.
Of course they do. But I'm just letting you know, I was taught they do not.
Yeah. And
I think it's in the perspective of like in a human, some people have the limited bandwidth and they only see one perspective. Animals have to say ABC to me so that they really learn. If they cannot say ABC, they don't learn at all. So that perspective, right? So
Well,
they don't think about the dog know how to wag the tail to show friendliness, or to learn the dog have to come with me so that he get food or whatever. So it's like definition of learning is so wide.
Can you say, pattern-based learning versus syllogistic learning? I mean, there's different levels of complexity there.
I mean, there are many perspectives of learning. So we got cognitive learning, we got psychology, learning, we got effective learning, all that's learning. So I call that dog learn because they need to survive. Dog learn because you got yummy food coming around. Dog learn because you give treats. So that's the learning log. So you can see the dog, like our dog, will flip around and then chase the squirrel. And when you tell them not to do that, they still cannot hold themselves. All that stuff. So.
Talking about dogs in Stanford, when I was at Stanford, we're talking about in the 1970s, the Stanford marching band, the drum major would come out with a Frisbee and a dog. The band had a dog, and the drum major would throw the Frisbee, and every time the dog would catch the Frisbee in its mouth. And it was a big hit that this Frisbee catching dog was part of the Stanford marching band.
If you don't call that learning, what do you call that?
I call it learning.
Yeah.
And at the Science Museum, one time they did an exhibit where they brought out a big python. It took like a line of 6 people to hold this python. And at the end of the presentation, I said, are snakes able to learn? Because I was interested in what point do animals have the faculty of learning? And as my recollection was that in so many words, they say, well, they can adapt to circumstances, but they don't learn in the sense that we use the word learn, as you can't train them. But animals are adaptive. They will learn to adapt their behavior to conditions and improve their adaptability. So the beginning of learning is adaptation. And it just increments little by little, becoming more and more sophisticated and perhaps more rapid. And also learning by imitation. A good example is, breakdancing. Kids get down on the sidewalk on their back and they spin around, and it's called breakdancing. I don't know who did it first, but as soon as somebody in New York started doing breakdancing, all the other kids imitated it. And dancing is a good example of learning by imitation, visual imitation, mimesis, copycatting. That's a kind of learning.
And just to throw in another distinction, there's not just learning, there's also an understanding. I don't know if that's the same as learning.
That's deeper. Understanding is deeper than superficial learning. So you can learn to imitate the way somebody talks, as mock their voice. But that doesn't mean you understand anything about what's going on inside their head. You're simply imitating a behavior pattern.
Like parrots and parakeets.
Parrots don't know what the words mean. Although they might learn that if you say, Polly want a cracker, they get a cracker sometime. So you eventually learn that, that some gestures will earn you a reward.
So I want to go out on a limb and just say that I think that some animals are capable of understanding, which is deeper.
Yeah.
What's your definition of that understanding?
Look up Irene Pepperberg on that story. Irene Pepperberg had a parrot, a gray parrot, called Alex, I think. And Alex had a vocabulary of maybe around 100 words. And the question was Alex's ability to respond to as many as 100 words, did that amount to understanding, or was that something shy of understanding? And it was really controversial as which side you would, interpret that on. Go ahead, Sam.
In a sense, I do agree with Stacey, because let's say someone is, emotionally troubled, in grief. Animals can sense this, and they can actually try and soothe in some way. So they've got a notion of this state called grief. They don't call it grief, obviously. We call it grief. But they do try to provide some comfort or some attention or some palliative behavior. They will lick. They will actually lean against you. They'll actually sometimes even hug you. They'll lay on you. So that's why I was curious in your, definition of understanding for animals.
That's it.
There was a video that somebody posted just, I think yesterday, 2 children about the same age, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years old. And the girl opens the cupboard, and opening the cupboard, it bangs the head of the little boy. And he's got a boo-boo, right? And he reacts, and she hugs him and kisses the boo-boo. Just instinctively. And you go, was that innate? Was that learned? But there's the empathy and the soothing reaction. She kisses him on the forehead where he got banged by the cupboard door. And they're wearing diapers. That's how young they are, these children in this video.
So this is actually a related idea that I think I've had the last couple of weeks, which is around this whole idea of machine learning and AI and danger to society and whether or not it's sustainable and whether or not we can guide it in any way. A lot of attention, I think, in this area has been devoted to how do we get the people who are doing this to do it more wisely, to do it without allowing dangerous behavior. I was kind of looking at the flip side of this. In other words, machine learning takes in a lot of data. The data comes from somewhere. The data has to be either contributed or mined or collated or curated or whatever. I was thinking, what are the practices we could put around the data provision, the data publishing, the data updates? And could we put together a guideline that we might want for this data to become consumed? In other words, I, as a data provider, let's suppose I run an enterprise contact center. I run 1,000 agents. I have, 20 sessions per minute or whatever, and there's all these transcripts, all of this video, all of this audio, all of this text that I'm collecting, okay? What right do I have? But suppose I even have in my terms of use that this can be used to improve my service, to actually make things better for the customers. If I provide this data set to others, let's say I post it on kaggle.com, and others can say, well, this kind of behavior leads to 17 seconds of less handle time, or this kind of knowledge base can cut down on this, error rate by 15%, or whatever, they want to do with this data. If I, as a data provider, say, in order to use this data, you must adhere to the following practices, i.e., whatever you want to call it, but use it for good, not for evil, but break it down a couple of different levels. I think there's something that might be interesting to pursue there as far as how I provide that data and for what purposes and for what techniques. It's just like, the GNU. The parallel I'm trying to figure out is the GNU GPL. In other words, you can use open source software, but if you modify it, you must not be able to sell it. You must also provide it back to the open source. So that way you can't abuse it, abuse other people's work for your own profit and not share it with the originators. I'm not sure that an easy model can be created, but I'm musing on this question about whether data providers can do so in such a way that then the people who consume them and then produce derivative works, or even, for pay services, if they choose to, has to follow some sort of ethical manifesto / guideline. And if we could do that, what would it look like? What would it say? What restrictions would we put on it? What would we ask these consumers to abide by? Over.
Great question. I love it. It's a timely question. This is where the understanding coming in. You're assuming the machine learning machine is capable of understanding. So differentiate between good, ethical, and not ethical and all that stuff. So unless the machine can understand whatever you want to, tell the machine to do for you, it's not capable of doing. Me don't see color, I'm colorblind, like that kind of thing. So from my perspective is, unless you can solve the problem that machine can understand one thing from the other, which is decided by human being programming, so you can calibrate and validate what is ethical, not ethical. I don't, whoever defined that get to control what the machine capable of, quote unquote, machine understanding versus human understanding is totally different understanding altogether. Basically, it's more like a translator rather than understanding. It's not a true understanding like the way I understand, because our understanding depend on emotion, and depend on the feedback, depend on the common sense that the machine is actually lack of. So the machine is incapable of understanding common sense, is incapable of taking your comment of that this is good, this is bad. No way to do that.
Yeah, there was a headline
Today. I think
I don't see how you can solve that because it's all digital, my friend.
no, I don't. This is where I think there's much to be evolved here. Just like if we talk about people understanding things, there's really only two things I think that we really talk about. Okay, what is the internal state of that person, and what that internal state really has? Do they have this emotion? Do they have that understanding? Do they have this knowledge, etc., etc.? Then there's the external behavior. So there's the external behavior, which can say, okay, this person did a kind act. You could interpret it that way, or this person did a malevolent act. Okay, so if we dig deep into internal state and external behavior, sooner or later, we're going to come up with some actionable definition of understanding.
That depend on internal and external state, and that's all it does. If you don't have enough internal state, as well as don't have enough external state, you don't have it.
That's right.
And unless someone is smart enough to be able to program that in and not make any mistake, which is impossible.
No, we're going to make lots of mistakes, but I think it's going to happen. In fact, I suspect people are doing that already. We can't
course.
stop the progress of technology. You know, the inquisitiveness of people's minds and the purposes to which they want to put technology to means that somebody's going to be working on this.
Yeah. And of course, there's something called supervised learning, right? You know that AI have the supervised learning. So the supervised learning is that's the prompter. I was encouraging Barry to be a good prompter, to be able to be to guide the supervised learning in the direction that's more towards, you know, how do I say it, more accurate supervised learning.
Did anybody happen to see the headline a day or two ago? These developers have typically an ethics team, typically small ethics team, but they have an ethics team. And I saw a headline, which I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, but one of the exercises the ethics team is proposing to do, maybe they've already started to do it, is to provide the LLM with an exercise that comes right out of a course at Harvard. The late John Rawls was a professor of philosophy, and I'm not sure what department, a professor at Harvard, and he taught something called the theory of justice. Get this theory of justice. And the exercise that he would give his students was called the veil of ignorance exercise. Has anybody heard of the veil of ignorance? I think, Heiner, you're shaking your head yes. You know this?
Is it that are you guilty if you can claim ignorance?
No.
You're innocent if you can claim innocence.
No. The veil of ignorance is you are going to enter a society and you will end up having a role in this society. But before we put you into the society with your assigned role, you must come up with a set of principles for how you propose to behave. And after you have come up with your principles of how you're going to behave, then we will tell you who, when, where, and what role you are in this society. And the optimal solution, mathematically, is to choose a set of principles that are indifferent to role reversal. That it doesn't matter if you're this guy or that guy, whichever guy you turn out to be, you're equally happy with the principles. You're willing to abide by those principles no matter who you turn out to be. That's the veil of ignorance exercise. And the idea is that the veil of ignorance exercise allows you to construct a set of ethical guidelines from whole cloth that you're going to construct and say, okay, now tell me who I am, and I'm going to live by these no matter what. And so they're proposing to do that, just as John Rawls did with his students in the Theory of Justice course at Harvard, which is a graduate course. And by the way, you know the emotion that goes with feelings of injustice?
The anger?
Anger. If you feel that you're being treated unfairly, unjustly, the typical first emotion is anger. So if you have a theory of justice that says minimize the likelihood that somebody's going to get angry, you or the next guy, then you want a set of guidelines that are as fair as possible. Nobody says I'm being treated unfairly, I'm being scapegoated or made an example of. And the argument is that you can get a long way in synthesizing a secular theory of ethical guidelines from this Rawls theory of justice, or similarly indifference to role reversals, in a slightly different version of the same idea. So I just an hour ago asked Google Bard, tell me about the veil of ignorance from John Rawls' theory of justice. And it gave me a 3-paragraph, very nice explanation exactly what it is. And the reason I asked Google Bard to give it that is because we had brought up this very question of ethical guidelines for AIs and how are they going to get them. So the first thing to show is that it already knows the concept of this exercise. And AIs can learn by example. You know, they learn board games by playing many, many examples.
That's all they do.
Well, yeah. And the thing is that you can use the same thing at the next higher level. Character in a drama. You're going to play a character in a drama and work out the, you know, the principles for how the characters are going to behave. And then we're going to tell you what character you're going to play.
Which
I
is
love it. Thanks. Good one. The problem I'm having with anger is that most people get angry because they don't get what they want. They feel they're entitled to and all that stuff. So there's a lot of confusion in the anger. Basically, behind anger is a fear of something bad will happen.
Yeah. The thing that you're not getting what you deserve to get, not what you want, because you can want the world. But what do you deserve to get? If you think
You and I understand that, but the people in anger doesn't understand that.
Yeah. So I think we're going to have a breakthrough both in learning theory and the role of emotions in learning, and a breakthrough in ethical calculus, because most people don't take a course in ethics. I mean, if you're in the School of Theology, you might, or if you're in, you know, the theory of justice in Harvard, you might. But how many people end up with a graduate level course at that level of reasoning? Go ahead, Sam.
Stacey has her hand up.
Yeah, I want to bring up a real world situation that fits perfectly into this, because I try to live and think exactly the way you just described. And one of the situations that I haven't brought up, because I know people are going to get crazy about it, is this situation with Jack Tertier, the 21-year-old boy who's being held in prison right now. And, you know, I'll say for the record, I detest, you know, what he did, and I don't like the type of person that he seems to be. However, when I think about the fact that they're keeping him in prison, saying he's a flight risk and all that, as a mother of a 21-year-old child, because at 21, there's still some gray area, I think that there's some, I don't know that people are looking at the situation as clearly as they would if their emotions weren't involved. So I know there are people that are very, very angry because they think he's a hero and he should be let out. And then there are people that are very, very angry because they think he's a monster and should be put away for the rest of his life. And I'm kind of right in the middle, thinking that he's a very disturbed, angry being that needs healing, and each one of us plays some role in that. And we could take him out of the situation and put somebody else in and tweak it a little, and we still have those two different angry, victimized sides. And somehow we have to find a way to change the way we just want to like punish and destroy. So, you know, again, I'm just sharing what's top of mind. I haven't really discussed this, but
how did he get to be that way at age 21? And why did the DOD put a 21-year-old in that position of responsibility when he's that young and inexperienced and naive?
Well, and that's my point. The system has a bigger problem than one individual.
Exactly. How did he get to be that way at age 21? And why did the DOD put a kid at that level of underdevelopment in that position of high responsibility?
Well, the one thing I do know is that he doesn't have two parents, or at least not two parents that are living together happily, because I did hear that if he were released, he would go to live with his father. I don't know anything about his father. I don't care anything. It's clear to me this is an angry kid. I don't think you're born an angry kid. So, you know, I mean, I can make up stories in my head about how he got, you know, this position. I'm sure there were people along the way that helped him get this job, just like there are people along the way that help most people get jobs. I'm sure there are people along the way that made excuses for him. I'm sure he did many things along the way that he just got a little slap on the wrist and they let him continue. I'm sure this isn't the first time that he did something racist or nasty or mean, and he got away with it.
Or not thinking, just not thinking.
Or just not thinking. Well, I think that's where my empathy comes in even a little more. I really, really, really don't think that this person had an understanding of how damaging what he was doing was. That's the main thing. I really
Or how
don't.
it would be evaluated as damaging, whether it is or not. The fact is, it's evaluated by people in power as very damaging.
Right. Sam?
You can use the word understanding in all the perspective. His understanding of how devastating this is, the person that let him have the authority to give him access to have the lack of understanding of what 21-year-old person can do to the damage, whatever they're protecting. And the government doesn't have the understanding of that. The people that give the authorization, the person that authorized him doesn't get penalized, doesn't get, go, what do you call that, get thrown in jail because you give the wrong person the authority. That kind of understanding, you can go all the way up to the whole system design. It's all about understanding. The lack of what I call calibrate and validate what you can. And I mean, think of this way: if I take a statistic of all 21-year-old men, whatever young men, how many have a need to show off to their friends, to gain recognition, to be the hero, to be the top gun?
But I want to bring it back to the whole victimization anger thing, because now I want to move away from him in particular and just talk in general, because so you have this one group, whatever the group is, and they're already feeling victimized by the anger that's coming towards them on the other side. And it just keeps mounting even more and more, because the more they feel victimized, the more they're lashing out. The more
That's
they
right.
lash out, the more the anger's coming towards them. Sam?
We understand, or I'm proposing, that just as there's different levels of maturation in people and their an understanding of the way life works and the universe and the way they interact with people, and dare I say even their degree of wisdom or enlightenment, let's say that there's different ways to interpret when each of those different levels of people are angry. Let's suppose somebody's still in the lizard mind, right? And they're attacked and they're in fear. There's a different kind of fear-based anger that you could attribute. If you take someone who's relatively calm and serene and relatively, capable, this is the guy that Lincoln was talking about. If you talk about what angers this person, or if you talk about angers the Dalai Lama, could you not then say that's a different fundamental dynamic at work there? And that's what Lincoln went when he says, take the measure of a man by what angers him. Is it trivial, petty stuff? Or is it, like social injustice? Or is it like, the way we treat animals or the way we enslave Black people, right? I think there's different ways to address anger. Anger is not all bad. Anger is useful. Even Thich Nhat Hanh understands this and publishes books about that.
You know what, Sam? I think you got to go one step deep before you get to anger and go to pain, because before you get to anger, there's pain. And I think that, and this is just my opinion, my theory, whatever. I think that there's two different ways to deal with pain. And when pain gets too difficult, the very sensitive turn to things like drugs to numb out the pain, things like that. And the other people create shells. And it's those people that create the shells that move more towards the anger, because anger is like a shell between that pain that somebody's feeling. So to me, that's where you see a great difference.
The word pain and the word punishment have the same root. In natural pain, if you do something stupid and you stub your toe, you're going to get natural pain, which tells you don't do that again. And we adopt that practice and impose pain as punishment if somebody does something we don't like, that is, who's in power doesn't. So you have this whole thing that pain and punishment kind of get conflated. because there's natural pain, just, stubbing your toe because you're clumsy and awkward and not paying attention where you're walking. And then there's negative feedback pain from the system, from the people who are making the rules and trying to force you to conform, and I'm going to give you pain if you don't. Punishment pain.
Just to bring up animals again, because I think that's part of the healing magic that animals bring, is that somehow when you look at an animal, you're able to see love reflected back to you. And that's something that's missing from these people that are in pain, and regardless of whether they turn to drugs to numb out that pain, or they just build up shells and they turn on the world and become angry people looking for people to blame. Neither of those groups love themselves. And yet when you become close to an animal, you feel a love that you don't normally feel.
There's a saying that you have to pause to diagram the sentence. Hurt people hurt people. Meaning people who have been hurt will then echo back the practice that hurt them to hurt others. Hurt people hurt people. And that's, you really have to ponder, that dynamic, that people reflect back what happens to them. Hurt people hurt people.
I love the way you bring back animal again and again, Stacey. Thank you. So from my perspective, if I may, is that because animal cannot speak our language, verbally speaking, they can speak other languages that they understand. So if they can speak English with us, it will be no different than human being at all. I mean, altogether. But that's because they take away the English language from the animal. So we will have to learn how to speak their language. And because we are incapable of learning their language, and therefore we are miscommunicated many times.
So this is one of the proposed really, really positive potential outcomes of AI, is for us to try and communicate with animals using AI. That the AI can then look through all this thousands, hundreds, millions of hours of animal behavior that no human could do. And
Before we do that, if I may, before we do that, we need to, how men has a language and women have a language. We can learn how to read. We have a translator, women's language translator for the men, and vice versa.
Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Anybody?
That would be a good translator right away.
Yeah, but yes, interspecies communication, even between men and women. Yes, this is
no, you're generalizing. I love it better. It's nothing wrong or good. It's just that you need to translate it because it takes time to learn and communicate. Yeah.
Right.
I get into a lot of trouble myself, so I know I need that translator myself.
There are people that I cannot decode what they're saying one bit. Not a lot, but a few. That whatever they communicate, whether it's in pictures or in verbiage, I go, I haven't a clue what they're saying. I don't know what that means.
And ditto, I would say they will say the same thing about you.
Probably. It's a funny story. Way back when we were first getting on the social networks, the early social networks before Facebook in the 90s. And I come out of this academic culture, because that's really what people on the internet were all basically in high tech and universities. And so my audience was always people who had college degrees and advanced college degrees. And when the general public got on, I was still writing as if I'm writing to my peers. And so you had people who didn't have that level of education. And one guy finally got fed up with the way I was writing stuff in this dense technical language. And he says, he called what I was writing boxcars of gibberish. A boxcar was essentially a paragraph, and he couldn't decode it because it was too arcane and technical. So he criticized it as boxcars of gibberish, which is kind of a funny insult, but so then I played with boxcars of gibberish as a term of art. And in the process, I translated it into German. And in German, it came out Frachtwagens van Kauderwelsch. Frachtwagens is like freight wagons, but that's boxcars. And Kauderwelsch is the German word for gibberish. So I had this equivalent expression in German, Frachtwagens van Kauderwelsch, until I ran into a guy who spoke Spanish, and he would write word salads. You know, same, not long tracks, but simply broken fragments of phrases and things that. And I thought, I need the equivalent of Frachtwagens van Kauderwelsch in Spanish, but I don't know any Spanish. So I went to, I think it was Google Bard or Chat GPT, and I said, let's figure out how to say this same thing. How would you say pipelines of gibberish in Spanish? And after a few rounds of looking for the right word, we came up with flujos del Algarabia. Flujos, flows of gibberish. Turns out that Algarabia is the Spanish word for gibberish. So now I have boxcars of gibberish, Frachtwagens van Kauderwelsch, and Flujos del Algarabia. I have three languages that say what you're writing is just nonsense, is undecodable. Sam.
My own experience of this, and I feel quite incompetent, is there's a friend of mine, I say in Facebook terms, who is either a graduate student or a practicing physicist. He's actually doing some very advanced research from the way he describes his posts. He's actually kind of prolific. He sends about 2 or 3 Facebook posts a day, but he's talking about, you know, his problems with the way people today see certain aspects of physics. And I don't even know what these ideas are. He's talking about symmetry. He's talking about quantum chromodynamics. He's talking about strings. He's talking about other dimensions. He's talking about other models. And he's talking about how he's trying to push some points of view, which he says are, are just obvious and, counter to what's commonly understood, because that's all false. And I am incompetent to give him any feedback whatsoever, but I find it fascinating that someone who's on the forefront, it appears, of some of this work and can speak apparently competently about some of the existing work and problems with it, just like you did, with someone's inequality. He speaks that way about some of the popular papers right now happening in physics. And in particular, something that you've criticized before, which is people have fine little nuanced little papers for PhDs that are just, nth degree, 9th degree, 10th degree detail that doesn't change anything, just simply because that's in their advisor's domain of work.
Right.
Well, I find it fascinating that I get this very strong sense of incompetence when I look at this person's posts. And so I'm just saying, at different levels of understanding, different levels of education, different levels of deepness of insight into various different domains, you pick it, whether it's physics or whether it's emotional intelligence or whether it's, any other aspect that you want to talk about. At some level, there's someone speaking gibberish. I don't know whether to make sense of this person's emissions or not, but I do know that I have to learn a hell of a lot before I can even comment intelligently on what this person is posting. Now, if you take the rest of the world, most of the people who haven't even gotten to, let's say, graduate level physics, let alone this level that this guy's working at, and most people, let's say 90% of people probably haven't even taken undergraduate physics. And how many people actually have taken even E&M in high school, and remember any aspect of it? How many people can actually remember Maxwell's equations? If you sort of understand that about the nature of people and their level of education, what this person is saying is, of course, gibberish. But that doesn't mean you can criticize it. You're not competent to criticize someone speaking gibberish sometimes. And yet you feel quite free, because we have a free country, to criticize anybody. That's the problem today. We have idiots criticizing intelligent people, and they get to vote.
Yeah.
There is one of my problems. Well, not my problem, but one of my
Sam?
It's an area that causes me pain, Stacey.
I just go back to your friend for a minute. Would you feel competent asking him a question though?
Absolutely. And in fact, I do. But here, there's so much that I need to learn that, part of me says even asking a question is wasting his time because it's not valuable to him to answer my question. It's more valuable for him to be writing his paper or to be reading somebody else's more advanced paper. So in my sense of responsibility, I have to seek ways to become competent without wasting his time. Otherwise, that interaction, may not be viewed as, in the end, positive for that person.
This is where you take one of his tracks that's hard to read and you toss it into ChatGPT 4 and you say, can you interpret this in high school English for me?
I may try that, but I suspect that these areas of physics are not necessarily large corpuses that GPT-4 was trained on. But I'll try.
You get closer. At least you get closer.
You can find out what the words mean.
Yeah.
You can probably get a definition of the arcane term.
String theory is. I can understand QCD. I can understand various different independent pieces of it.
Right.
But how they, aggregate into some conclusions that he may understand, unless there's a paper specifically written about that topic, I suspect GPT is not going to be competent at I
can help you find it.
But I'll find out.
Yeah, you can help find it.
Back when I started on my Facebook travels, I would go to a children's dictionary and I would throw the words in there.
Yeah.
And you know what? It was so much easier to understand. I mean, these people did not have to write in such a complicated style. They really didn't. Sam?
There's a joke about that, okay? In other words, when all this texting and chatting and Twitter and Instagram and Discord and stuff got popular, kids started using some of these abbreviations, right? Like LOL, POS, blah, 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 right? And most of the people know what POS means, right? But some parents would not.
Right.
So there's an alternate dictionary created for parents who wanted to learn. So when kids are saying, hey, my parent wants to know what POS means, it just means, it means parent over shoulder.
Funny.
This was a science dictionary, but it was broken down.
But you get what I'm talking about, right? So there's the in practice, verbatim, not verbatim, colloquialisms.
Right.
But then,
two different meanings. The safe for work meaning and the not safe for work meaning of the same.
Yeah.
Same
like
acronym.
YOLO, YOLO, right? You only live
once. What's the other one for YOLO?
Oh, there's a zillion of them. Again, meant to, divert.
I mean, I know you only live once, but I'd have to look to find out that it has other funky meanings. Secret meanings.
Oh.
By the way, there's a funny anecdote that was on public radio a few years ago where a guy was texting and he thought that LOL stood for lots of love. He just guessed what it meant. And so when the topic came around to lamenting that somebody had died and they were going to the funeral, he ended it with LOL, meaning lots of love. But of course, the other person, had a completely, what are you saying?
That's exactly the reason why when I was growing up, I would buy every dictionary on the bookshelf of the bookstore. I have usually about 6 or 7 dictionary, all that. And that's how I learned, because I want to make sure everything is all checked out, because especially Chinese dictionary, there are so many versions of it. Some of them tell you a story and some of them would give you the scientific version of it. So they're like, when I go like, why do you need so many dictionaries? I need to double check and triple check because dictionary do make mistake.
I'll tell you a funny story. This is a true story. When we were in grammar school, you could get these little pocket dictionaries or just a few pages, not very many words. And we would find the words that, you don't normally use as a child. And one of them that we found was kiss, was in this little dictionary. And what the definition said was caress with lips. When I read it as careless with lips.
That's our modern Tower of Babel.
Yeah, because I knew the word careless and the word caress wasn't in my working vocabulary. I simply read it. Kiss, careless with lips. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Speaking of which, on
To
the
a fourth grader.
when I was in Taiwan and I entered a store where the people were not as good with English as most people, we found that the apps used to translate between Chinese and English
Mhm.
allow transactions to take place. They're actually reasonably good. If you can afford the time, those apps are very, very valuable. They really are.
Heiner has his hand up.
Well, I enjoy the conversation and I have another example. I was used to use caps, large letters, because when we had to write a text someone was to read from the prompter, it was easier readable. But when I later used caps to make emphasis, people were always thinking I'm yelling at them. They became very emotional and felt agitated.
Yeah.
So it is not just relating to letters, but how you have certain conventions.
It's like these cultural differences of how close you stand to someone when we're in conversation. Different cultures have different distances that are acceptable. Or gestures. Or looking people, in the eye versus not doing so. It all means things in different cultures. One of my great faux pas, which I didn't realize until weeks later when I first visited India, is I would relax. I would want other people to feel relaxed. And so to indicate relaxation, I would put my foot up on my desk. Big no-no in India.
Right. Don't show them the bottom of your shoe. That's an
Was your
insult.
shoe on? Was your shoe on?
Yes.
That's even worse.
I was watching a video where Steven Pinker was sitting in one of those chairs in front of a white green screen. Because I don't know why, but there's one group that does it that way. And he was expounding on some topic, but he's sitting, back, leaning back, with his feet out and the bottom of his shoes showing the camera. And I'm listening to his explanation of some topic, but my comment was, what does it mean when you're showing the bottom of the soles of your shoes to your audience? Because his English speaking audience wouldn't notice it. But a non-English speaking audience would be off-put by somebody kind of leaning back, and have your feet up still on the floor, but like that. You never, a good example, the Chevy Nova, the compact car, couldn't sell in Mexico. Why? Because in Spanish, Nova means it doesn't go. Nova doesn't go. And the people who named the car never thought about what does it mean in another language.
I think there was a gas brand called Esso or Echo or something that had
ESSO, Standard Oil.
That's right. That had some international meaning that was derogatory.
That one I don't recall what Esso would have meant in another language.
But isn't Esso became Exxon, right?
Well, Standard Oil was broken up in the big antitrust suit 100 years ago. And so all the spin-offs, Standard Oil of Indiana and Standard Oil of California, SoCal, and Esso, ESSO, they all were different variations of the original Standard Oil. And Exxon was the name of one, I can't remember which one it was. Might have been Esso. I think Esso was the one that they wanted to get rid of the name SO, ESSO, and they're the ones that made up a name Exxon with two X's, that they did all kinds of research to make sure this word doesn't exist in any language, including English, and has no meaning in any of them. So they had to make up this name that was going to be completely
Yeah, I only know that because I literally remember the signs being changed.
Right, exactly. That was Esso. Esso changed their name to Exxon. And then there was a political cartoon that showed the White House and a sign above the White House said Nixon with 2 X's. It's still the same old gas.
So anyway, looping back to this idea, I'm actually going to draft something around this data provider license. I'm going to try and use the GPL as kind of an inspiration for that. In fact, I'm going to ask GPT to write one.
I'm finding it really a wonderful tool to play around with. When people write comments on Facebook and I don't really know what to say about them, I just throw their comment or their post into ChatGPT. And if it's any good, I'll paste it back in. And that sort of so when you get no response, because nobody really knows what to say, it's like a MacGuffin. It sort of keeps the conversation going.
I'm using more and more, AI tools in my business and in my technical learning or problem solving. Like, for example, firewall that we just replaced the Cisco one with the Fortinet firewall. Anyway, made long story short, the last 5 years, there's a lot of concept I get mixed up and doesn't really quite understand. So last week I purposely use a thread to like feed the information in there and keep track of it and all that stuff. It's like it solved so many of my problems. Like it's like I don't know what you call it. It's like dictionary, but this is the hyper dictionary or super dictionary that really helpful because you keep all the facts straight. You know what it's talking about. If it's if I've noticed make a mistake, all I do is grab the technical notes from there and just feed it to it. And now that you have the knowledge, now tell me the better version or something along that line. Very useful. And I think from my perspective, the evolution will be pretty soon. We don't need to have any tech support in any complicated product anymore because the AI will take care of everything.
Yeah, which is something I'm worrying about because that's my business.
But the difference is that because the tool from AI can do 90% of the thing, you need smart people to decipher them and to make sure that it's doing the right thing. So your job is protected because you're all the way the CTO. Because if you are the network administrator, you won't have a job. Because everything on that part of it can be automated. Because you are the one that makes sure that. So same thing with Barry, because your knowledge is what I call is beyond them. So you know exactly what their mistake is. If your knowledge is below them, then you don't know what their mistake is.
Right.
You guys
Yeah,
know.
I have another one of those activities in process. A week or two ago, somebody found a logic puzzle that ChatGPT couldn't solve. And I think you saw this, right, Sam?
Yeah.
So we pointed out that ChatGPT fabricated a solution, but the fabricated solution was stochastically fabricated, so it was wrong. Didn't solve the logic puzzle. And then somebody posted another logic puzzle of that same genre, the knights and the knaves and so on, except this one was identified as the most difficult one ever constructed of this genre. So I posted it, including, by the way, the article that it came from, which says this is the hardest logic puzzle of this genre that's ever been developed, and almost nobody can solve it. So there was a young guy who threw it into ChatGPT and posted the ChatGPT solution, the stochastically generated solution, and was absolutely confident that the solution had to have been correct. So without even reading the solution or studying it, I said, I'll bet you $100 that ChatGPT solution is wrong. He took me up on the bet. He says, I'm going to post this over on LinkedIn tomorrow morning, and I'm going to take you up on the bet. So I said, oh, okay. And I actually said a few words why I thought that, ChatGPT would have gotten the wrong answer, but I didn't go into any detail. But the previous logic puzzle that we'd done a week or two before, a guy who sort of knew me because I think we both worked at BBN years ago, he was the first person to try to solve it and solve the easier one, the one that a high school student should be able to solve in 20 minutes. He solved it correctly. So I said, I tagged him and I said, what do you think? And I said, by the way, I said, of all the people who are likely to be able to find the flaw in GPT's solution, I says, my money's on you to solve it, to disprove it first. And by the way, if you do that, you can have the $100. So sometime this weekend, I think this colleague of mine is going to post his debunking of the solution, and also and do it in such a way that the guy who's so confident it's correct concedes that it's been debunked.
We need more activity like this so that the understanding of what AI can and cannot do is more, I call it, that's what the topic of last week was, the difference that make a difference.
Right.
And what I learned from the talk with sitting down with the difference that make difference, believe it or not, that phrase has been my favorite phrase for the last 10 years. I've been using it a lot of places, probably 10,000 times over the last 10 years.
Yeah, Gregory.
And what I realized was last week was just like, give me one more next up to the better understanding of what the difference make difference. You know, in order for you to tell the difference or make the difference is, you have to focus on one thing at a time.
Right.
But you focus on first thing and then focus on second thing, now you can tell the difference and make the difference. Otherwise, ain't not happening.
What's the detail that makes you turn left instead of right?
Yeah.
So where going left is the correct way, the optimal way.
Right.
Going right is the commonplace way, but it's the infelicitous way, the unproductive way. Well, what's the difference that will get you to change your mind, to take a better practice?
Yeah.
And that's really, if you're an educator and you see people laboring under misconceptions, and Stacey knows that I talk about this a lot. How do you get somebody to appreciate that they're laboring under a misconception, correct the misconception, and then change direction accordingly? That is really, really hard for an educator to do. But the nice thing about the chat GPTs is if the chat GPT articulates a misconception, because it pulled it up from, random, it's good practice to lead GPT to recognize a misconception and to admit that it's recognized a misconception and therefore try a different tack. Most people, when I try that with people, they sort of vanish. They, like the Cheshire cat, they just suddenly disappear.
What I found also is that the more data you have it, the highly dense data you have it, the more, I would call that collective consciousness. So if you have more data, you're more conscious. You have less data, you're not as conscious as.
But the more data you have, the more likely there's a subtle inconsistency buried in it.
That's also the next level.
And that's what's fun with these chat GPTs is because they write in very plain English,
Right.
readable English,
Definitely.
you can recognize if they've got an internal inconsistency. It'll be easier to recognize, and
Right.
it's easier to point it out because you can quote the two sentences that are contradictory. Whereas
That's
when
right.
people sort of wave their hands and use vague terminology, there's an inconsistency in there, but pluck it out and shine a light on it. Good luck.
So it's a good tool to get bias, collective consciousness.
Yeah.
This is where you have it.
I think that educators will really find this a real boon to take poorly written or poorly articulated material, clean it up so that it's well written with diagrammable sentences and correctly spelled words and all, and then find where there is a misconception or a gap in it, and then fix it. Because with real people, most of the time that doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of gets lost in the fog, and then they kind of don't respond, and pretty soon it's a year later they're back to where they were a year ago. They didn't learn anything.
Because real people only give you a sampling of it's called a lot of very few data point, from that perspective.
Right.
So it's not very useful.
And English is so flush with vague terminology where you can say something that's plausible, but if you say, what does this word really mean? Specifically, well, it has more than one meaning, and one way to think about it, it's okay, and the other way it's wrong. And what can you do with that? It's just, go ahead, Stacey.
Remember, Barry, remember when you did that diagram that you shared with Julian? It was, you had worked on this diagram, I guess at Bell Labs, where you were able to show a pattern. I don't remember the specifics, but the point that I'm trying to get at is I'm wondering when they'll be able to use the technology from ChatGPT-4 with something like DALL-E, where like somebody like me will be able to say, create a video that shows the relationship between blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
That can be really useful.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping that by the end of this year, we'll have a free or very low cost access to prompting for image processing or even video processing. I've seen demonstrations of it, from the behind the scenes experts, but and there was one just yesterday. A guy used GPT-4 to compose a musical motif. Gave it a description of a musical motif. Did you see this, Sam, yesterday? I'll give you the link to it when we're off. But he described a piece of music, verbally, and then it composed, about a line of music, and then he refined the prompt, and he got it to generate a really nice piece of music from a verbal prompt.
So for the record, Penny Me was trying to do this 30 years ago at Stanford.
From verbal prompts, descriptive prompts?
No. But, just trying to get AI to create the artistic creations like music, like poetry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Kurzweil actually developed it, I think, in the 80s. In the 60s, they did it at Bell Labs, but they weren't using descriptive prompts. They were using statistics of what sounds musical versus what sounds cacophonous. And from this, in fact, Mozart, I think, and Beethoven actually invented dice music. Do you know about dice music?
The randomness.
Basically, they had a table. You would roll the dice, and whatever the dice came up, you would enter the table at that number, and that would give you a couple of notes. And then you would roll the dice again, and it would basically stochastically generate a piece of music that was musical. And this dice music, went back to when was Beethoven? Was it 1700s? What, 800? Whenever they were?
1800s.
1800s. So Mozart, might have been Bach. I think might have been Bach and Mozart. But if you look up dice music, in the 1960s, they were implementing dice music with the first computers at Bell Labs and generating samples of music that was generated stochastically from this rule set that Mozart and Bach had suggested. And there was a guy who finished some unfinished symphony the same way. He pulled out the statistics of the first part of the unfinished symphony, and he said to the computer, maintain the statistical pattern and finish the symphony. And then he played it, and he challenged the audience, can you figure out where the transition is from the original to the synthetic? And it flowed. I mean, unless you were a real, super expert in music, you couldn't tell, the difference between the original and the extension.
I know now that AI can tell a story, like a good physics teacher will be able to tell a story to link all the theories together so that the student will understand and all that stuff. What I really want to be not only tell a story, but make an animated movies out of it so that I can watch the movie because they have audio, visual, all that together that allow me to understand a complicated concept. When that happens, we'll be allowed to have all the great teachers around the world to teach everybody, that the level of education will be just goes up exponentially, from my opinion. Yeah.
Can you imagine in maybe 5 or 10 years, you're a parent with, say, a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid. The kid wants a bedtime story, and you take something that happened that day, and you say to ChatGPT, create a fairy tale or a bedtime story involving this prompt, and it'll make up Real in real time, and in 2 seconds it'll make up a story. I did that today. I gave it a prompt. Once upon a time, comma, that was the whole prompt, and it made up a couple of stories. And then I did the same thing in that Hindu language version, back when tigers smoked pipes, comma, and it continued that into a bedtime story.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I done that with my kids when they grow up. So, but I added a few more things. Not only happened today, but at the same time, I want them to tell me. So I let them fill in the blanks for me,
Right.
so I can know what's in their head. So it's interactive, co-creating story, and it's relevant to today's. And I want to know what they think, and I want to make sure that they have the right concept and the right understanding, as well as all the right, the whole structure about it. Yeah.
It's like Arabian Nights, Scheherazade and the 1001 Nights, where every night she starts to tell the Sultan the story, but she never quite finishes the story. So she finishes the next morning. And so for 1001 Nights, he keeps telling these stories, because previously he would marry somebody and he would have a wife for one night, and he would behead her the next morning. But Scheherazade had this trick of starting a story the night but not finishing it until the next day.
Cliffhanger.
It's a great, Scheherazade and the Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights. Here you got 1001 Nights. It can generate stories day after day from an arbitrary prompt. Make them up as you go along. I couldn't do that.
So if that's the case, you can learn all the physics, chemistry, all the academic stuff at home, and then go to school and play with your classmates.
Exactly. Yeah. You could do a Brazilian physics.
And have an experiment lab, or science lab in college or whatever. You provide a space that the ChatGPT cannot do physically, and you provide that space for it.
Yeah.
And the theory is being learned at home interactively.
It'll be quite interesting when these systems acquire the faculty of epistemology, testing what they generate to see if it agrees with reality. Because they're basically making stuff up. They're bullshit artists. They can generate an infinite amount of bullshit, flights of fancy, and they wonderful fairy tales, but it has no way to say, oh, if you want a hypothesis that actually makes predictions that agree with experiment, that's a whole another story. I can generate hypotheses till the cows come home. Okay. But how do you know which one is the correct scientific theory? You got to go run an experiment and make a real prediction.
Yeah,
they're nowhere near doing that yet.
Agree. I don't label it as bullshit. I agree. I would say that it's more part of the stages of learning.
Yeah.
And one of the stages of the learning is called enough to be dangerous.
Make believe. Yeah. You have the faculty, what the Irish call the gift of gab, the make believe, and an awful lot of entertainment is taking make believe. I mean, the two probably best examples were the radio show Fibber McGee and Molly. Fibber McGee was a character who could make up these stories, on the fly, and they were totally made up, but they were entertaining. And then George Burns and Gracie Allen. Gracie would tell these stories about her relatives, these crazy stories, and you knew that these stories are, fantabulous, but very few people, have this gift of gab, just making up a story on the fly with, minimal prompt. And there's no requirement that it be the ground truth. Just got to be entertaining.
I always believed Gracie Allen.
You thought those were true stories, huh?
I did.
Fairy tales are, gripping. You sit there and you read or your parent tells you a fairy tale, and it's an imaginary world, but the world is coherent. The key thing is that the world is internally consistent. Doesn't agree with our world, science fiction or fantasy fiction or fairy tale, but God, children grow up on fairy tales. How to make a narrative that holds together. When I gave it the prompt, once upon a time, one of the responses was from the ABC series called Once Upon a Time.
Mm.
So it basically gave me a synopsis of that particular real drama that ran on ABC for a couple of seasons. And then it made up another one that was just, totally, I don't know. I'm assuming it was totally fabricated. I certainly didn't recognize it.
How you feeling, Josh? You all better?
Thanks for asking. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting better, but not all better. Thank you for asking.
Oh, you were coming down with a congestion or something from
Yeah, just everyone got sick. It's just,
everybody got sick. Yeah.
yep. I just keep thinking when you're talking about all the things that we know, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the question I like to ask the Chat GPT. What are the questions that we don't know that we need to ask?
Well, also include what is unknowable.
Yeah.
But I wanted to jump in on another issue. You see, I have Sunday mornings, the time when I listen to TV, because that time our children are educated through very good. I mean, we in Europe, we in Germany have a lot of documentary which are free and good public education. And if anyone wants to listen to this, they can. But what is now happening to our children, they're getting all these fairy tales, all these fantasy stories, and they're so detailed that they have no chance to make up their own imagination. It is so fantastic, so elaborated, that I fear, when I first thought children television is good, then I fear we are dumping our children down.
Maybe. But, there was a saying that if you want your children to learn good English, read them fairy tales. If you want them to get really good English, read them more fairy tales. I mean, that's really how you get literacy. You get literacy from reading stories, and you start with children's stories, which are fairy tales, because they're simple enough that you can understand them. I mean, a real news story is got too damn many details that are too hard for the average person to sort out. Which is one of the reasons that the fake news is so popular, because it gives you a very simplified non-news story that you can follow.
At the same time, also remember that the story is only one side of the story.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting when they say, well, we reached out to the other side and we haven't heard back from them. You only got one side of the story.
That's right.
Didn't get the answer back. And if you ask the bad politicians, you're going to get gibberish back.
Yeah.
You'll get a whole lot of verbiage that doesn't say anything.
Because the politician need to say something that to please as many people as he can please, and not step on any toe, even one.
And fill up the time so there's no room for follow-up questions.
That's right.
Well, you're going to be a good politician, Barry. You got the rules down.
The thing is that suppose I got elected to high office so I could help make the laws. I wouldn't want to make laws. I would want to make functions that you can plug into a feedback loop that regulates something. And the language of the law is words. I can't make laws that have mathematical functions in the feedback loop.
Well, you couldn't before, but now you can with the Chat GPT.
Well, the point is that all the systems that people like me work on are technology systems where the feedback loops are implementing mathematical functions. The feedback loops aren't sending sentences around. If you said the feedback loop has to work in narrative sentences, what are you, nuts? How is your cruise control going to work if you have narrative sentences running around the cruise control feedback loop? Forget it. That ain't going to work. You need mathematical calculations, mathematical functions in the loop. Cruise control or cruise missiles. I mean, cruise missiles don't have this conversation going on inside of them to figure out which way to steer. Cut me a break.
I think you missed the point, Barry.
I did.
Yeah, the point is you don't need whatever you can't do, you just say you don't need it and you convince people they don't need it. And then you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
That's politics.
I mean, I could say, well, we need ethics. If we had ethics, we wouldn't need laws, which is true.
No, we don't need it. We don't need ethics. It's too complicated, too hard. Let's just keep the corruption and skim off the top. Come on.
But if they can imbue ethics, calculus of ethics into these AIs, which I think ultimately they will be able to do, that'll be as big a breakthrough as the New Testament.
How would you do it? That's the question. What structure do you need, and what kind of data you need to feed it? Because it's all data driven thing, right?
Yeah.
Deep learning. So either it's a structure or the data. So you can handle the structure will overtake the data, but without the structure.
Right. I gave a prompt to ChatGPT a month or two ago that was the same prompt that I gave to teenagers 30 years ago. It was a simple ethics reasoning exercise. It was called When the Ethical Minority Meets the Moral Majority. And it's a very simple scenario. The moral majority makes a rule, and the rule is the ethical minority must obey the rule of the moral majority. What happens next? I gave that to kids and they worked it through discussing it. And then I gave it to ChatGPT and it generated very efficiently the optimal solution. That the kids eventually got after a lot of conversation. But ChatGPT worked out the optimal solution, like that. I didn't even have to whisper to it. I just gave it the scenario.
I'll be interested to hear the prompt the answer from ChatGPT, because it's a very complicated prompt from many perspectives. I want to see how they solve.
I'll find out where I posted it, but I posted it someplace. Maybe after the talk, I'll find it for you.
Okay, sure.
I'll
Thank you.
find it real quick.
Yeah.
But,
Josh just wants to jump in with something.
Oh, I just saw Sam's question in the chat. How do you ask about the unknowable? I was wondering if Sam wanted to ask that question. If that was I thought that was a good question, Sam.
He might have stepped away.
Oh, okay. That's why I was asking if he's still here.
Yeah. Well, while Barry's looking for what he's looking for, though, I just want to say what's always on my mind, because he just mentioned how the kids discussed. I get really fearful that we're not leaving enough room or the importance of discussions. Discussions are so important to our society. And I just think we have to keep that in our mind as we think about new systems and technology and how we can create systems where the discussions are more productive and where we learn to better navigate where maybe we come up against brick walls. But we can't leave out discussions because, like when Heiner was talking about children and watching things and their imagination is sparked by hearing other people's ideas. And there's an importance to the speaking them out and to the listening.
Agreed, totally, Stacey. Basically, discussion is a form of feedback system. Any system without feedback is trash. That's all there's a best can tell you. So we must have, and we must allow, we can encourage, we promote, do whatever it takes to, to get more discussion going, because without discussion, you have a dead system.
Yeah, I agree also, Sam and Stacey. That's
All right. I also tagged you on the Facebook post where I
Thank
put
you.
it. This was March 14th. So we're talking about what, 6 weeks ago?
Mhm.
You know.
Thank you.
And somewhere, I'm not sure if it's in that thread or not, I post the link to the transcript where the teenagers responded to this prompt back in the mid 90s. And you can compare ChatGPT's response to what a group of teenagers responded to the prompt.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that somewhere in that in the comment thread it's in there. Let me just see if I can.
Was there a major difference that you remember between what the teenagers said and what GPT?
Not in the conclusion, but in the process of arriving at a consensus, they were all over the map. So it took them a lot longer to get to essentially the same solution.
But it would be interesting to see where all over the map they were.
Well, that's why you have to go back and read the transcript.
I would love to have a next prompt that say, how do you implement it, or how do you change our current system so that we can accommodate that?
Well,
I like that.
Well, what's interesting is that historically in America, in the 60s and 70s, you actually saw this played out in the public affairs. This essentially this simplified, well, the moral majority makes the rule. The ethical minority must obey the rule of the moral majority. What happened in the 60s and 70s is really, it basically illustrated the solution that both the kids and the AI eventually proposed.
So mathematically sound, but not implemented, but was implemented and they get destroyed, or implemented was not fulfilling the political agenda.
Well, it's the question of how do you fix an unfair political process that's endemic, where people who have power are telling people who are the minority what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
Or else,
So you want to add, like, how do you do this at the same time will allow the politicians to stay in power, at the same time it's not allow the whole, I call it, so majority has the power. If you don't take care of the majority, then if you take care of the minority, you're taking care of the exception. Anytime you take care of exception, you can spend 80% of your resources taking care of the 20% of the people that need it, or something along that line.
Anyway, when you come to this, if you don't find the link to the original with the kids, let me know, because I'm not positive it's in this thread.
Now, I'm more interested in how do we implement it? How could we satisfy all sides of the power struggle and majority serving need, as well as something that I don't even know about?
Well, there's two phases of the implementation. One is to raise awareness of the dysfunction. That's the premise of the
Step one.
And then the second one is that once that people say, okay, our current method of regulating human society isn't working the way it was imagined or envisioned, what do we replace it with? What's the next governance model that comes after this one that ain't working? And that's a separate stage of the thinking.
Well, if you don't follow your own rules,
This,
I mean-
this, go ahead. I mean, this gets to one of the funniest stories, and I probably told the story before. Back when the chat rooms, the forums and the chat rooms were first becoming available in the mid to late 90s, you would have the host of the guy in charge would set the rules for what was okay and not okay, and he would throw you out if you broke his rules. And Utne Reader magazine, Lens Publishing, which published Utne Reader magazine, decided to finance one of these early discussion forum chat rooms. It was called Cafe Utne. And they got a guy who unpaid volunteer to be the guy in charge of running it. So he basically had to make and enforce the rules for decorum. So if you are the person who's in power, but you have practices which are eminently criticizable, practices which are unbecoming. Two things. One is you can come out and criticize the practices, just straight out criticize. The other one is that you can demonstrate that, number one, they don't work, and number two, the guy who's in charge of making the rules isn't following his own rules. He himself is violating his own rules. And so one of the things that I would do was do something that was within the rules, and in his but it would annoy him. And his reaction was to break his own rules. And one of the things that he would do is he would make up rules on the fly that were so arcane that there's only one person that they could possibly apply to, namely me. So he would make up a rule such that he expected me to break that rule so that he could have an excuse, to kick me out. And I was very good at going right up to the edge of his rule, but not breaking it. But so then he had to revise his rules, and then he eventually would throw me out. Now, back in those days, I would re-register under a pseudonym. And sometimes they would figure out right away that I was back under a different name. And so I was learning how to come back in a way that they didn't recognize it was me. Now, here's the funny part. The guy's name was Kai Hagen, K-A-I-H-A-G-E-N. And he was going to go on in life to become a local politician, but at that point, he wasn't there yet. So I created a character. I came back as a character, and the avatar name was Genhaika, Genhaika, and the display name was General Haiku. General Haiku, Genhaika. Genhaika is an anagram of Kai Hagen. I was on for a month before he figured out that I was back and I was using a name that was an anagram of his own name. And by the way, after Cafe Utne went off the air, he did run for county commissioner or something in his local town. He got elected. He got exposed by the local newspaper for some kind of corrupt practices, similar to the strange way that he was sort of being a control freak on Cafe Utne, and he lost his job. He either didn't get reelected or I can't remember exactly, but he basically repeated his unholy practices as a county commissioner and ended up getting into a scandal.
Yeah, people don't change, and the
He
way
didn't.
that they know how to do something is the same way they continue to do it in other places.
He might have learned, in his early days from his shenanigans as the Uber host of Cafe Utne, but he didn't learn. And I ended up the whole thing was documented. I mean, you could still read the transcripts. But it gets to your point of how do you change people? And the answer is, well, you do whatever you can figure out is the best practice. And for certain demographic, it doesn't work.
I can only focus on how I change myself. The way I change myself is that I have a compelling reason to do so. That's number one criteria. Once I have a compelling reason, then I look for ways that what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Without a compelling reason, I can say I want to change myself. Nothing happened. I will excuse to get myself out of not. I will not change it eventually. Basically,
Well,
nothing happened.
By the way, that story I just told you was written up in Time magazine. There was a journalist who wrote for Time magazine who wanted to do a story on chat room exiles. And he got wind of my story and he interviewed me and he interviewed Kai Hagen. And I still have on my website the excerpt from that Time magazine article from 1998 or whenever it was, you know, of this funny story of me trolling this Uber host.
So what was your compelling reasons of doing so?
Fun, entertainment.
Well, it was two reasons. I mean, it was more than one reason. I mean, first of all, the guy's management style was really obnoxious. Okay. And what I was doing is I was getting him to manifest his obnoxiousness as obnoxiously as possible. And that meant he really wanted to get me out of there. So he was desperate to find some excuse to get me out of there. And he kept making up these rules, you know, that only applied to me. And then I would sneak back in and he wouldn't recognize it. In fact, I'll tell you another funny story. I don't know if we were talking about Ishmael last week or something. There was a journalist, not a journalist, a cultural anthropologist named Daniel Quinn, who had written a prize-winning book called Ishmael. And the book was a work of fiction, but it was a piece of work of fiction that was supposed to introduce the ideas in his academic work on cultural anthropology. So Cafe Utney had this guy on as a guest visitor one day, just to talk. And I had read his books, and I was very impressed with him. But I had been banned at the point when he was going to come on. So I registered under the name, what was the name? Alan, I forget. But the name I adopted was the name of the main character in his book. And so I'm asking questions of the author of the book, and I'm purporting to be, you know, the name of the character in the book. Kai Hagen has no clue because he hasn't read the book. So he's hosting this session, and he's completely oblivious of the fact that I'm communicating with the author, and the author knows damn well that I must have read the book. And I'm asking him at a level of academic depth that is his scholarly work. So I'm questioning about his work in cultural anthropology using the name of the character in his book. Poor Kai Hagen has no clue that it's me. I'm exposing him to people who are in the know, and he doesn't know he's being exposed until maybe afterwards somebody tells him.
So knowing what you know, doing what you did, create the result what you created, how would you do something differently this time if you have a chance to engage with him for the same scenario?
With Kai Hagen?
Yeah.
Oh, I would definitely disguise my identity, because if I didn't, he wouldn't respond at all.
I see. So that's the
so basically I have to do it in the form of a drama where he doesn't know that I'm playing the role of the character. Now the thing is, as far as I know, he's not online anymore. I mean, I can check, but I think he kind of retired from the social networks when he went into politics, and I don't know what he's doing now, because we're talking about 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
So would you say that he provided a platform for you to entertain yourself?
Not only myself, but See, there are a lot of people who didn't know how to give him any feedback.
Mm.
And so I was giving him feedback in a very edgy way that the insiders knew what I was up. They knew who I was. They knew what I was up to, and they were not informing him. So they were enjoying this, this scenario. And so it was this cat and mouse, like Saturday morning cartoons. It was this cat and mouse game. Okay. So I'm playing the mouse and he's playing, the cats who's trying to control things. And he has no idea what he's up against.
You're playing a mouse that look like a kitten, that same color as him, that blend in.
Yeah. So it was very entertaining. And I learned a lot too, because, I've never dealt with control freaks before. And the question is, what's the best practice for dealing with control freaks? And I was basically trying out these different gambits. And the thing is that he can kick me off the system, which he does, but then I sneak back in with a different ID. And I could do that because I could make up new email addresses at random, which he wouldn't know. I mean, a lot of people only had one email address. So when they registered, they couldn't disguise their identity, but I could get around that. I could generate email addresses that he wouldn't recognize.
I don't know how you define control freak, but I define myself as a control freak. For example, to say that I need five pieces of information that I need to control. I want to be aware of it so that when something comes up, I know what to do about it. When I'm missing some information, I get panic because I lost control of the situation already totally. So I define myself as control freak because I need to know everything that's going on with this 5 subject or 5 perspective or 5, data point or whatever they want to call it. So that's why I have the pressure.
One of the ways that you derail a control freak is you don't give them access to relevant information.
Yeah.
In order to control something, say you're sitting in your car, you
Yeah.
got your hand on the wheel, everything's fine, the car's fine, you got your feet on the pedals, but you cannot see out the windshield.
Yeah. Take away one.
You have 100% control of the car.
Yeah.
But you cannot observe the state of the vehicle on the road. Can you
Yeah.
control the car?
But the car is going to crash.
The point is that you can only exercise control if you have timely, real-time, accurate information of the current state of the system.
Right.
If you don't know the state of the system, it doesn't matter that you can turn the wheel because you don't know which way to turn.
That's right.
So the thing to do is observe something that's relevant that the control freak is not observing, and don't clue them in.
I don't get it. I'm
Well,
lost.
so for example, he's trying to control this community,
Right.
and there are things going on in the community that he does not have awareness of.
So he's controlling for the sake of controlling, which is irrelevant. So I don't really care
Right.
what this is happening, but I care about this. He's
Right.
controlling something that's irrelevant to him. So
Right.
that's
So I put
So-
something in his face that he can see because I'm interacting right in front of him
right.
as a character. Okay.
Right.
So the only thing he can see that he can attend to is my engagement with him. And
Okay.
all the other stuff that he's not seeing is going on behind his back. Go ahead, Joshua.
I've just heard of this situation in companies many times, and I'm thinking of all he has to do is set something up where you have to interact with him that you can't control, and then he can control you.
Well, he would control me by kicking me off. He kicked me out of that system, I don't know, a dozen times.
Right. Well, his system was flawed, and you just the flaws that when the person comes into the system, he didn't do his due diligence to find out who they were.
He had no way to find out. I would
Right.
tell
He
him,
didn't implement this. If he implemented a system to find out, which is he would have to have a certain control of how many people verify that you are the person that you say you are.
right, he did not have a way to verify identity. And most of the
Right.
people in that system had screen names.
Right.
They weren't there under the real name, they were under a screen name. So part of the thing was you could come in under a pseudonym and you did not have to disclose your real identity.
Right. So
I-
I'm saying, I think you got a lot of joy out of understanding the system better than the person trying to control the system.
Right, exactly, exactly. And it was so I could be very creative. You see, when you make a rule, the way you get around the rule is do something creative that the rule didn't contemplate. So I got a chance to be as creative as possible to come up with a gambit, which the rule didn't cover. So you have to make a new rule. And every time I created a new gambit, he had to make a new rule to outlaw that gambit.
Stacey has her hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, so I've been in that position and I understand the joy and the entertainment value of all that. But I heard you say, how do you, what's the best way? And honestly, the best way is to not deal with them and to leave. So I understand maybe a few minutes to show the people around who they're dealing with, but then get out of there. And if they choose.
When you have a choice, to live, sometimes you don't have a choice, like dealing with your only doctor that take care of you or something along that line.
You know what? I have to say you always have a choice. You really, but I will say there was a time where I was running against a current board for president of the condo association. And the whole board was totally corrupt. But what I did is I set it up so that I let people view what was happening. And I let them see for themselves. Like I knew the response I was going to get, but I allowed people to see it for themselves. And that's all you can do.
Right.
Nice.
And that's what I was doing. I was letting everybody else see what was going on. And so the people who saw it from my perspective, they were getting both entertainment and an observation of how this control freak kept stumbling. And by the way, eventually Cafe Etny got shut down by Lens Publishing. And the people who had created all the content, the actual real people in it, ended up starting their own system using the same software, but without this guy being the control freak. So they basically ended up becoming their own democratic community. And that one is still running.
But I just want to go back to what Sam said, because I think it's really important. You always have a choice. You always have a choice of who you deal with. You just do.
I understand. So the reason I'd say, I'm not saying that I always have a choice. You and I always have a choice, but there are a lot of people with a limited bandwidth. They will see that it's not a choice. So what do you tell them? This is what I tell them. I see the gift of their control freak. I see there's a reason why, for example, the control freak that Barry's talking about is this control freak because he's trying to keep the job, make sure the payroll keep coming or whatever the reason is. So if I can help them to understand what the control freak, the compelling reason behind the control freak, you can help them to get what they want, then they will let go of the control because there's no need to control because when they feel safe, when they feel, they're, safe and whatever you want to call that, trust you because they're safe, then we're good to go.
Josh, and then I'll go after Josh.
Yeah, I just keep thinking of the greatest control that was instilled in my life is the definition of economics being the allocation of scarce resources. So the word scarcity is the control. If it's scarce, then they have the control. But if it's not scarce, then there is no control of economics. And that is the biggest rule set by somebody a long time ago of scarcity that is completely false. But for me to prove that to everyone here in this room that that's false, it goes back to what Sam just said, is how do I help everyone know that there is no such thing as scarcity?
And what I was going to say is, what I've found for me is that when I've come up against control freaks, it's usually because I've had to learn to let go of control. So, and with that, I have to leave, and Sam put in the chat that he's leaving as well. So have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, I have fun. Thank you.
I just had a question. I was sending to Sam this program of the Society of General Semantics, and I was listening in parallel to them. If you never heard of them, it's still going on until 6 Eastern.
Mhm.
And I did some paperwork here and listened to both of you. And in 15 minutes, it's about, let me see, feeling and form. And then it is about hearing, listening, mind. And all these issues are very, very close to what you're discussing here. Maybe they are online later, but I was sending Barry the program. And if you're interested, I can send you the link. And if not, maybe you learned about them not at all yet, or you hate them. It's all possible, but it's Kotzebitsky on the map is not the territory. And I discussed with them, the model is not the territory, but it can be also very helpful.
Thank you.
This was my last 5 cents. I enjoyed your session.
Yeah,
Good to
I need
see
to
you,
go
Tyler.
also. Take care. Thank you.
Here, Heiner.
Bye-bye.
I was gonna say before I go, Barry, there's Google's gonna announce their MAGI, MAGI. And it's their new large language model that's coming out. They'll be announcing it on May 10th, hopefully, at the Google I/O conference.
That replaces Llama, the current one.
We're gonna find out. They haven't announced it yet, exactly what it does, but it will
What they really
Hopefully.
need desperately is one that is grounded in reality, because Bard is producing all kinds of generated content, including pseudo citations and pseudo academic articles which don't exist, and that's not good. It's one thing to do flight of fancy that's advertised as a flight of fancy, but to pretend that it's academic content when it isn't, that's not good.
Yeah. I think it's gonna merge with their search engine model, and it's gonna be a competitor to the Bing Chat
Right.
GPT.
Yeah,
So it'll be something that it's a team of 160 people that are working on making the search engine relevant in this new age of large language models.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
it'll be,
that's really been a problem with Bard, is it just makes up stuff and it doesn't bother to fact check it. And if you're doing research, you don't want it to be making up stuff.
well, I'm telling you now because it'll be rolled out to a select few. So if you get on the wait list now, maybe.
So do you know if there's a URL to get on the wait list?
I don't know. I just heard about it yesterday, so I haven't looked yet to
But
find out.
MAGI, so I'll look to see if there's MAGI is listed as a waitlisted thingy for the general public, because I'm not an insider, I'm a general public.
Yeah, I don't know if they have the wait list yet, but I just know that, that's how Google, they get a small group and then bigger.
Yeah.
So,
I got into Bard within a day or two of when it became available.
yeah, well, they had to put that out strategically
I know. And I think technically, I think that was a mistake, because they put out Bard where it was only doing language arts and it wasn't doing fact checking or epistemology. It was basically completely leading whether or not anything, and it was generating things that looked like they were legit. It would generate references with my name as the author, which I know that it was totally made up, synthetic references.
well, I think what's coming down the pipeline is one system is the control for the next system, and then that next system is the control for the next system. And these models of how one language model or one trained system works as the brain for the other, they're going to just keep playing with that in many domains until they come up with one that models reality properly.
I think by the end of the year, they will fix that problem where it doesn't generate bogus academic material that's non-existent.
I hope so. I think they have the means to do it in terms of cross-referencing information. It's just a question of the cost to do so. And
The
what
other
is
thing it doesn't do is if you point out to it that something that it said either is non-existent or is self-contradictory from something it said a minute ago, at the point where it can realize that it has generated gibberish, it should be able to feed that back to the developers, because that's not controversial. If it realizes that it's made a mistake, because you pointed out the mistake, and it says, oh yes, that was generated and it disagrees with reality, at the present time, it throws away the feedback. It doesn't even make a record of its own confirmed corrections.
Yeah, well, it's a learning model. It's a language learning model. So as it's learning, it needs the memory, which they put that one pine cone thing as a memory. But to me, it's like architecting a new system of compute, if you will, with these large language models.
Yeah.
So it's like rebuilding the bus or the cache or the RAM or how do you access the memory when you got to go through this giant long list of a hard drive, but then you've got, an SSD drive that you can access it quicker. So I think the modeling itself, it might even change the entire model of the internet itself at some point.
I hope so, because right now the internet is no longer living up to what the NSF originally had in mind with the National Research and Education Network back in the early 90s. That just basically went up in smoke. And now we have this. Well, in fact, Hal Abelson, way even back in the mid 90s, Hal Abelson referred to it as the Internet of Lies.
Mm-hmm.
Already he called it the Internet of Lies. And that was before it really was manifestly a source of misinformation, intentional disinformation, misinformation. And it's real. And once that stuff is out there, it's really hard to weed it out of the system. Scientific material that's 100 years old has been overthrown, but it's still in the database. It doesn't know that it's been overthrown.
Well, I'm not sure who said it, if it was you or Sam Chan was saying that epistemologically, that's the key, is to understand how did you get to that conclusion? Show your work.
Right.
And I think the key to the internet that we're in now with social media or Web 2.0, whatever you want to call this, to be able to show the work, what are the algorithms doing?
Right.
I think that's going to be the new most important thing, is to be able to open source how you got to that conclusion. And that's what I want to see is, okay, great. That's a good answer. How did you come to that conclusion?
And how did you falsify the competing ones?
Yeah.
This is really important. I mean, the one thing that will stop people who are giving me a line of bullshit, I will say, how did you falsify the null hypothesis? And at that point, the bullshitters vanish. They turn into Cheshire cats and disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I've always done my learning, is to say, okay, that's a great idea. That makes perfect sense. But how did you come to that conclusion? Oh, well, I worked off of the work of this person.
Right.
Okay, let's study that person. How did they get to that conclusion? Oh, I worked off the work of this person. And I keep taking it back as far as I possibly can with the written understanding, but it usually goes back to a point so far where it gets distorted, where you don't know the true manuscript because it was completely lost. Of, let's say, Leonardo da Vinci. We only know so much about what he did, but it was written in, mirror images and cryptic communication.
A lot of stuff is lost in history. But you could still, semiotics is a wonderful thing to do with these, because they're very good at language. So if you ask them definitions in semiotics, and they give you the etymologies of words, usually they're reliable on etymologies, and they're very helpful on etymologies. They're real fast and efficient, and you can typically confirm that the etymologies are correct. And if there's more than one etymology, because it's from different languages, it's usually pretty good at saying, well, there's this branch and there's that branch, and there's a dispute over which branch is the one that's, the source. But that's really helpful to me. Semiotics is a wonderful way to go back and figure out, why does this word mean what it means today? Did it always mean that?
what is that word? I've heard that word many times. I don't know. Semiotics.
Semiotics is a branch of language studies, study the origins of signs and symbols, of which word origins is etymology.
Okay.
So etymology is a special case. But for example, what's the etymology of this symbol? Okay. And so you can have all these, like all the classical symbols, not just words, any kind of symbol which has a meaning, So semiotic studies all signs and symbols, not just etymologies.
Barry, are they going back to Greek and Latin only, or
No.
also Egyptian and old languages? That's my first question.
Well,
And second,
most English words go back to Latin and Greek, or a little bit of Hebrew.
yes, and they're using Greek and Latin.
Yeah. Now, if you're talking about pictograms, a lot of pictograms do go back to hieroglyphics, and they will. It's harder with ChatGPT because ChatGPT doesn't have a symbol set to show you hieroglyphics. At least I don't think they do. So if it's not in an alphabet for which it has a font, then you're kind of screwed because it can't present an image that's in a font that it doesn't, it's not available and on the internet.
Well, not anymore though. They're letting the computer itself read the pixels and recreate the fonts and the pictography.
Yeah, unfortunately, ChatGPT is still text. It's still ASCII.
Correct, but there's the side version. Not stable diffusion, but the ability to recreate the pixels itself, meaning you use ChatGPT to do 3D modeling.
Right.
And you'll see that it understands X-Y axes and space and time.
When it can do Pong, when it can do pixels, then it can draw an image of a glyph. Right now, it can't do that. Right now, it has to send ASCII to you.
Well,
I don't think so. Go ahead, Heiner.
My second question was, but I didn't mean to interrupt. My second question was, how do you retrieve it? Is there a URL? Is there a repository?
Retrieve what?
All these words and their meanings.
Oh,
what do you use?
I just simply give it a prompt. I say, give me the definition and etymology of a word, and I'll put the word in quotes, and it will give me the definition and the etymology. It'll just in narrative text, and it will say, I'll give you an example. I asked it just recently because the word stochastic is now becoming more used. I said, what does the word stochastic mean? And it gave me a very nice, 3-paragraph explanation, including the Greek root. Stochastikos was the Greek word for to make a guess. Turns out the stochastic means make a guess with some probability that, the guess is probably likely. So instead of doing the word of the day, where I wrote the script for the word of the day, I simply said, ChatGPT, today's word of the day is stochastic. Google board, tell me about the word stochastic. And I pasted it in.
So you don't use
and everything. It says it means that it involves probabilities. It said it means anything involving probabilities is stochastic, and it comes from the Greek word stochastikos, which means to make a guess. And then some examples, weather, and I don't know, gave me like 3 examples of stochastic processes.
So you don't go to a certain encyclopedia or repository.
I went to bard.google.com or chat.openai.com. It's my user interface to whichever one of these LLMs I'm using, and it generates the response in readable English, or in some cases, if I ask it in a different language. Joshua.
I'm just curious if you're taking it to the level of code where you're asking it to write a spreadsheet or write Visual Basic in the back of an Excel thing or a Google sheet.
I did that once. Unfortunately, I'm not facile enough in code that I've exercised that. But I did try on a couple occasions just to see how it looked. And yes, it can generate code in any of, I don't know, several dozen computer languages, including Bash, including the Unix shell. Now that's one language I sometimes use. I haven't used it lately, but if I wanted to write me a shell script, it supposedly has the ability to write shell scripts for me.
Yeah, I think it works better with code because from what I heard of the story of how it started to become intelligent or started to actually be able to do stochastic predictions properly,
Right.
was when it was trained on all of the code in the GitHub model.
Exactly, because that has a very rigid semantics, whereas
Exactly.
ordinary, I mean, natural language has a very loosey-goosey set of rules for language, but computer languages have very strict grammar, syntax, sentence, or whatever structure, statement structure.
Right. It's
so
offs and ons and rights and wrongs.
right. So it can zero in on precision probabilities for what comes next, including where the parentheses and the punctuation go and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think the genius will come from someone asking a question that comes out in English and then write a story in a JavaScript model that visually plays a game that teaches you the understanding of this paragraph. So in other words, taking the language modeling and turning it into a visual representation, whether it be, let's say, a card game or some sort of computer program that these pixels move this way, and the logic of the game is the logic of, it's like turning a model, a mathematical model into a word problem, and then turning the word problem back into the mathematical model.
Yeah.
I think that's where the power lies.
And right now it's not very good at that, because if you give it a classical word problem like you would give to, I don't know, 7th grade, it very often generates the wrong formulas.
Right. Well, it's trying to predict what you think it would be, but then it needs, like, to me, it's not about it getting it right. It's not going to get it right. It's a learning model. It's a large language learning model. It's not a large language know-it-all model, because it doesn't have all the information of everything in the world. It doesn't have access to all of our brains yet.
Right.
Thank God.
It doesn't have basically, when you get up to about algebra, it can do first order predicate logic pretty well. The syllogisms and the logical fallacies of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. First order predicate logic, which is really logic using sentences, all A is B. It can do that because that's straightforward, and that's pretty commonplace in literature. When you get to algebra, where you're doing symbol manipulation with algebraic stuff, it starts to stumble pretty bad.
But isn't that what Wolfram Alpha was trying to do with his model?
Wolfram Alpha does it. The thing is that you got to talk to Wolfram Alpha in its input language. And the problem is if you give an ordinary human readable word problem, it doesn't know how to parse it to map it into the input to Wolfram Alpha reliably. It will map it, but it'll be a bad mapping, and then it'll give the wrong prompt to Wolfram Alpha.
But isn't that what, have you used Auto Chat GPT?
Not yet.
So that's the idea of it's mapping it. It gives it to Wolfram Alpha, and Wolfram Alpha gives it back and says, this is the answer. And then you ask it, does that look right? And then it has to keep circulating until it gets it right.
Yeah. So the iterative looping to correct it, I haven't gotten to the level where I can set up an iterative loop to zero in on a fixed solution. The stuff that I'm doing right now, it will generate an arbitrary number of random perturbations of the response.
Sorry, my kid was banging on the window outside. Hi. I'm talking to Barry and Heiner. Say hi.
Hiya, Aya. Hi, Aya. There you are.
You want to say hi?
She ran away. She ran away.
Okay. Here, hold on one sec. I'm gonna. Sorry about that, guys. Dancing.
She's running away. Oh,
Say hi to Barry.
Hi, Aya.
He said hi.
She's dancing.
She likes to entertain. Sorry.
She's a
The minute you
performer.
put the camera on, she's an entertainer. Yeah, well, we'll figure out this looping problem, Barry.
Anyway, I expect that this year they'll make some good advances in fixing some of the early obvious flaws. You know, what they call hallucinations, which are not really, I think that's a wrong word, but it's the word that they've been using
Oh.
for making stuff up.
Yeah, well, let's as time goes on, let Google come into the fray. Bedrock just got announced by Amazon, so I think by the summertime we'll be able to play with some really fun systems that solve these problems.
By the way, one of the gurus in AI was talking about, for example, what Amazon was coming up with, and he used the word dropping. He says Amazon is dropping, and then he gave the name of a product. And I didn't know if he meant that they were discontinuing that product or introducing it, because the word dropping is used colloquially as introducing instead of discontinuing.
Yep.
And I gave the actual transcript of that passage to Bard, and I say, tell me what is meant by dropping this product. Does it mean introducing or discontinuing? And Bard analyzed it and says, oh, it means discontinuing. That was wrong. The guy was using dropping as they're about to introduce it, but he said they're dropping this next month.
Right. Got it.
I had no idea which way to read that because I didn't know the name of the product.
Yeah. Well, I just found a place called the Commonwealth Organization of California, and they're looking into all of this stuff, and they just had a big meeting on everything going on from the outside looking in. So there's a lot of perspectives on both the monetary aspect of business and then the science aspect of just greater understanding and solving the alignment problem.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the most important thing, is solve the alignment problem before you solve the economic problem, because that's the race, I think, for regulatory.
I wanted alignment with ethics, not with making money in the next quarter. If the alignment is we want to make money in the next quarter, screw the long term, that's not the alignment I want. But that is the more commonly, it's the CEOs say we need to make a profit in the next quarter, then we need to still be in business in 10 years.
Well, that's I think Microsoft versus Truth GPT, which is Elon's new thing, because that was what he was trying to do with OpenAI, but it got away from him. So it's going to be an interesting race in the next, I think the next year and a half is going to shape all of humanity. So,
yeah. And I understand that OpenAI is organized as a nonprofit corporation. Is that right?
it was, and then they closed it, and it was 2017 or 2018 when ChatGPT 2 came out, where they realized that if they kept it open, it would be dangerous, and that's where Elon Musk split from the company.
So they started out as nonprofit and then went to profit making?
Yeah, they started out as nonprofit, as open source and nonprofit, and then the nonprofit side of it got co-opted with the VCs in Silicon Valley, and one of them being people, eventually Microsoft was one of the investors, but they started off as, the whole concept was from Elon Musk and his group of friends saying, if we don't regulate this and open source it, same thing with Fei-Fei Li from Google. Do you know about her? She was the lady from Stanford, the top AI expert. She got onto Google's board with one stipulation, that she go around the world and take a sabbatical to make sure that there was regulatory and open aspects of AI before she did anything for Google.
Is John Brockman the name of one of the guys in OpenAI?
Yep, that's one of the
John
OpenAI
Brockman. I
guys.
saw a video. I saw an interview with John Brockman that was just a week ago, and it was contemporary.
Yeah, on the TED Talk.
Yeah, the TED Talk. And in the TED Talk, he says it's nonprofit. And I thought, oh, it's nonprofit. I didn't realize that. Now you're saying, no, it used to be nonprofit.
I'm saying it might still be technically a 501 something nonprofit, but the technology has been co-opted out of that. So in other words, a nonprofit can give their stuff to a for-profit place.
So there is still a nonprofit entity, but there's also a profit-making spinoff of it. So when Brockman says OpenAI is a not-for-profit, that's only a half truth.
Yes, I mean, all of non-for-profits are half truth, but that's a whole other story.
Because they're licensing it to Microsoft for $10 billion, essentially.
No, well, technically they were licensing it for the use of the Azure server. I don't even think they even got the cash to the non-for-profit. They got the use of their servers to put it out to the world.
Oh, all right. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, because I'm thinking, okay, if it's not for profit, then making money in the next quarter is not the alignment. It's ethics is the alignment, or something closer to ethics.
Yeah.
And I'm going,
Yeah.
that's the case.
It's getting very interesting, and there are a lot of non-for-profit places that are trying to open source. I mean, it's always the same thing. You've got the non-for-profit, the university side, and the corporate world.
And the university is getting funding from the government or whatever, and so they want to keep the funding coming. So basically they become captive of the funders.
Right. And then you've got the space that's uncontrollable, which is all the people like me and you out there on the internet.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And my downside is that I can do AI whispering and publish it, but it doesn't change the database. Whatever it quote learns from me is thrown away.
Right.
Even if I publish the transcript on Google Blogger, it doesn't read Google Blogger. It's not part of the training database anymore.
And that's why Elon Musk bought Twitter.
Yeah, and then I think OpenAI doesn't use Twitter anymore as one of the training databases. The thing is, OpenAI is you can write, like a 3-sentence paragraph. That's it. I mean, that's not literature.
Well, to me, it's just reminiscent of the 90s on the internet, and you were there, so you know exactly what happened.
It went commercial and it went down the tubes.
Exactly, and that's what's going to happen here. The same thing. So,
yeah.
But the big case that I'm really concerned with, and I'm watching the space, is there's two countries, Russia and the United States, who are not willing to say, I will not write an algorithm that allows robots to kill people.
Yeah. Well,
that's the main question, is if we can, as a global society, decide not to do that, then we'll be okay. But if we don't, then we're going to have some problems, because the next wars are going to be very hard to fight.
And I also want robots that don't spread misinformation, disinformation, and that correct information when they realize it's incorrect, that they will publish a correction, which they don't do.
I think that fight is gone because the algorithm's already out there.
Yeah.
So
they don't even know that they know that they're generating stochastic text. They don't know if what they're producing is counterfactual or not.
Well, maybe we should have this conversation on another GCC about creating there's a lot of people trying to do this. It's a big movement to create regulatory commissions for exactly what was said. Because it takes a regulatory commission to keep the information intact.
There's a real gotcha there, because a regulatory commission operates under the government. And the government is axiomatically foundation on the concept of the rule of law.
Right, but don't think of the government. Take out the word the and think of governments plural around the world, because Heiner doesn't deal with the government. He deals with his government, and we don't deal with the government. We deal with our government.
All governments today, based on the axiom that was introduced by Hammurabi and his cohorts, that the way that you regulate something is with a heap of rules and laws.
And those rules and laws are created after there's a big problem. So once there's a problem big enough to garner the attention of all the governments in the world, then we will create that regulatory commission. But while before that happens, there needs to be some sort of delegation or communication among clubs, commonwealths, governments, etc., so that when it comes time to create that regulatory commission, there's some sort of communication set up. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Well, see, the problem with basically laws begin with thou shalt not XYZ, thou shalt not PQR. They don't say,
Well,
thou shalt use the calculus of ethics. Thou shalt use advanced mathematical functions which models have been validated.
Yeah, let's just keep it simple and go to the 4 rules of robotics from Isaac Asimov. And if the world can adopt that, I think we can figure it out.
Yeah. But see, I want to move from rules, heap of rules, to protocols, to functions, to models, to systems, like we did at Bell Labs. I mean, at Bell Labs, what I used to do at Bell Labs is they would have a practice that was written down in the book of practices. And the practice wasn't working. At some point, the practice wasn't yielding the anticipated behavior. And they would give me a problem. Barry, why is this practice not working? I said, well, because it's written down as a rule, and it should be based on a function, a math. Throw away the rule and replace it by this mathematical function. And I kept replacing rules by functions, going from the language of thou shalt or thou shalt not to compute this mathematical function, and the number that you get is going to guide you what to do.
Well, let's go there. I mean, that's a possibility. So I'm for creating functions. In other words, that's what I think we're heading towards, is a different way of creating law. I think it'll be very different when you have these large language models able to evaluate things that seem right to the mass majority of people in an instance, but then when you put it through your large language model and everyone can see, just like you said when you went into that chat room, everyone that knew you were there could see what you were doing.
Right.
That shining the light on the hypocrisy of the rules and regulations that are not functional in a quick way, if we can do it quickly. And it's starting to get quicker and quicker. At least you can see with the large media companies, they're really having to check out, look what's going on right now with Fox News getting sued.
Right.
These large media corporations are not able to do the miscommunication that they were able to do in the 1970s. There's too many eyes on the prize, if you will. There's too many people looking at things behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, there's basically 2 worlds. There's the world of I need to make money now, and never mind whether it's unethical, or I need to have an ethical practice even if I'm starving to death.
Well, I'm watching the economic system crumble in America in real time.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's going to crumble. And when it does, a new system will emerge out of it.
There's a very famous passage, and it may have been edited for drama, but when Jesus was before the Sanhedrin as to whether he was departing from the Jewish law, the eldest member of the Sanhedrin was a rabbi named Gamaliel, and Gamaliel said something really powerful. He says I don't know if the work of Jesus is the work of God or the work of a man. If it's the work of a man, it will crumble.
Yeah.
If it's the
Yeah,
work
sorry, I
of
just
a
put my
man,
headphones on.
yeah. The point is that there's a concept of divine, which really means sustainable, ethical, becoming, and then there's stuff that's unsustainable, unethical, unbecoming. And if it's the work of a man, it will crumble. If it's the work of divine inspiration, more power to it. But you're basically taking the power away from the individual and saying, do ethical best practices for the global system, not what's going to make me,
Yes.
what's going to help me in the short term screw everybody else.
That's exactly what it comes down to. So we're going to move into that world, I think, very soon.
Yeah, and that will be sort of the new version of the Messianic era. The Messianic era is not any one person is going to come and figure out the solution, that it's going to gradually be from the ground up, the grassroots,
Yep.
a gradual awakening.
I think that's how it's going down because we're all connected now.
That's my expectation. The only question is, how fast and how efficiently will that happen, or how chaotic and erratic and problematic will it be, and how long is it going to take before we sort it all out?
But that's what I was trying to get to is it'll only be as fast and efficient as we are communicatively fast and efficient, meaning how fast can we all communicate the needs of everybody without all of this politics and disinformation campaigns?
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I'm really fascinated by this new affordance of the large language models and the other AIs which are lagging behind it.
And so the question that I have is, will we all have access to similar information?
Eventually, perhaps, but I mean, I'm 78 years old, so I don't, if I'm lucky, I've got another 15 years before it's lights out, probably less than that. So whether I'll live to see it and be able to participate in it in any significant way, it's
You'll live to see it. It's happening quick. It's happening quick, Barry. I'm telling you, I've never seen any. Have you ever seen anything move this quickly?
Well, what I know is that ChatGPT went mushroomed in a week or something. It went to it got 1 million users in a week or some crazy thing like that compared to the anything else.
Yep.
That went viral.
Yeah, I've never seen things move this fast in terms of development. It's the fastest I've ever seen anything move.
I think that's right, at least in terms of, in terms of an innovation that a lot of people, 1 million people began using within a month or two of its introduction. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yep. Well, I have to run just because the little one is getting impatient. Good to see you, Heiner.
I only have one last question. You mentioned the name John Brookman. Is this guy with the hat in New York who did the Edge, this circles, or is it another one?
It's a TED Talk. He's the brains at OpenAI, the brains of the company that does ChatGPT. He gave a TED Talk recently, and it's up on YouTube.
No, this was a guy long ago in New York doing high-level dialogues.
No.
Okay.
John Brockman, the OpenAI ChatGPT TED Talk of a couple of weeks ago.
Farewell.
Bye-bye. Let's see, 138. 2. Okay, Sam, I am going to let you know that we went until 2 hours and 38 minutes. And I don't think you're there to stop the recording. So we ended at 38 minutes past the second hour. I cannot stop the recording for you. And I will leave meeting.